again, and this one's going to be about running e-exams, so on campus and distance. So, Andrew, over to you.
Thank you very much, Geoff. I'm good with this, thank you. Yeah, so Mathew asked me to distill our practice to show you how it can be done. I'm not going to speak for very long because, like we heard earlier, I'm the only thing standing between you and hands-on experience of the real thing. So I want you to have that opportunity. What I'm going to be talking about is the stage 2 of e-exams, where the whole exam was on a USB, so there's no networking involved. Now with the latest robust e-exams, we're hoping that this might be a way of the past. But I think some of the problems that have emerged, such as making sure that students can actually have the skills to operate in the exam, the solution we've got will work in the future as well. So I'm talking about some of the units I teach in digital technologies in teacher education, and this is a typical distribution of our students. As you can see, we have them scattered around quite a lot of Australia in 1s and 2s. We have a group of 3 in Adelaide, a group of 6 in Melbourne, and a couple in country Victoria. One up there in Brisbane, and then 3 sets of 20-ish on the 3 different campuses in Tasmania. So it's not a nice, neat sample in one single place. And also, we do find that our student cohort has some quite interesting demographics. And here's an age profile, and that profile on the bottom is not a linear scale. You'll see that the students at 21 and 22, the majority of them, and then it goes 23, 28, 29, all the way up to 52. So, you know, we're quite clearly targeting a very broad spectrum of students, both geographically, in gender, and in age. So if you can work it out with this kind of cohort, you can probably work it out with almost any cohort. I think that's the learning I'd like to extract from that. So we've been doing it, as I expect you know, in UTAS for quite a while, but generally with small numbers, and we've now institutionalised it to a certain degree. And you know you've made it when you have a page on the university website, yes? So here, if you go into the university website and you just do a search for e-exams, this is probably what you'll come up to. It gives you an opportunity to see a little brochure about the thing. It has a general introduction, but then we go into specific sections for each of the different target audiences. And obviously the most important audience would be the student audience. And so this page is pretty crucial for them, and it's open to everybody. So if you wanted to go in and see what it was like from a student's point of view, you'd be able to do that. So there's some general introductory words. It says check your exam timetable. It says you could attend a face-to-face taster if you wanted to. But more important, because we've got that geographical dispersion, we can't really ask the people in Perth to just fly over for half a day, you know, just to check their equipment out. We've got to find a way of doing it at a distance. And so they can, first of all, create their own practice e-exam USB. We give them instructions on how to do that. And they can try it out on their own computer, at home, in their own time, and have a go at doing a practice e-exam. It says whatever method you use, you could also, well, you must then print out your own e-exam compliance certificate. So I'm going to show you through that process. And the certificate is something that our information technology support officers insisted that we bring in. I kind of fought against it to begin with, but I think I'm with it now. So once they've downloaded the e-exam USB, they've put it onto a USB, they've been through the instructions of altering their own computer setup, as Gabby said about the BIOS settings, and they've managed to boot their own computer and had a bit of a go at a practice e-exam, which includes some video and some sound and so on. It tests each of the different functions of the computer. They then go into a web page and they can build a certificate for themselves. So they have to put in their name and their student ID number. The date is already pre-populated, and it asks them about the computer that they're basically certifying. What's the main colour? what's the manufacturer, and what's the model number. So it's a pretty good way. We haven't actually gone as far as putting the serial number, because a lot of people can't find the serial numbers on their computer. And we're thinking about it from the invigilator's point of view. I'll show you how that comes out in a minute. Were you able to boot it up? What one-time boot key did you have? And this is quite important, because you can write anything you like in these boxes. And this is a piece of paper they can take into the exam. So if their computer has a particularly obscure process that they have to go through to boot up from a USB, they can document this here. And you know what it's like in an exam? All that learning just flies away, you know? But they've got it there in their own writing in front of them. So if they lose their nerve, they can just follow their own notes on this piece of paper and they can boot up into the exam system. Could you play the video? Could you hear the sound? So have you validated their functions? So this certificate, at the moment, it's a self-assertion. There is, in fact, when you build a USB, when you boot from it, the USB captures quite a lot of this information from the computer itself. So in a further development, we would build a database and we would actually capture that information. We'd say, put your USB in now, the one that you use to boot your computer up, and we would capture that information off the USB, and that would be a better way of verifying that the student has actually done it properly. You click on Submit, and as a result, you get a PDF, and this is the e-exam certificate. This certificate is provided as evidence a student can run the exam system on their particular computer. It's only valid if no substantial changes are made to the computer before the exam. It gives their details, it gives the colour and the type of the computer. And the idea is that when they go into the exam, the invigilator will say, have you got your computer? Yes. Does the colour on the computer match the one on the certificate? Yep, we're okay. You can go sit down, plug the USB stick into the computer and start up. So this process is one way of making sure that students do have the skills and a compatible computer ready to go into the e-exam, delivered at a distance. So that's probably the critical part of our website. We also have a section for staff. This is only accessible if you have a staff log on, so this is something that you can't get to from outside the university. It has a manual, because over the years we've documented the process. It says, to begin with, the lecturer has to have a vague idea that they might like to use an e-exam. What do they then do about it? They have to get permission, they have to tell the students and so on. So all that process is gone through. It has guidelines for academics, IT officers, and for exam supervisors. So I'm going to go through those fairly quickly just now. So there's the manual. It's about 10 pages long, has some of the history of the process, but it's there as a reference for people. For academics, we've tried to introduce this e-exam system, making as little change as possible to what academics have to do. So at the moment, our print-based system requires them to upload a PDF file with the questions for the question paper. It has to be formatted quite a lot. I'm one of those people who's had their exam paper sent back 3 times because I used the wrong logo and I used the wrong font and things like that. It's highly regimented and stylised, but that's to make sure that students get a quality experience at the end. We can understand that. It's based upon a Word document in most cases. We ask them to provide the Word document as well as the PDF that they normally give. And that's about the only change that at the beginning stage the academic has to deal with. At the end of the process, of course, instead of getting a big stack of paper answer scripts, they get a USB with a load of digital answer scripts. So it's much lighter for them to get back. But that's the only change at the end of the process. We don't dictate whether they should mark on screen or on paper. I do know that our law professor, when they did a trial in law, took the USB like a piece of hot potato and gave it to the secretary and said, print out all of those. And it was still better because they could read the writing. So that was still a gain, not to the planet, but to them. The next section talks to the IT officers. And at this stage of the introduction of the technology, having that technical support is still quite important. And they needed to have clear guidelines about how their work would cooperate with the work of the invigilators. So we had to provide them with a diagram, a wiring diagram, for setting up power. There's no networking cords, as Thomas has in your example, but we do need, well, we have committed to providing a mains power socket for every candidate. And so, obviously, the first place to put a load of those sockets is by the wall. I'm going to show you a video in a minute, and I say, well, why is it that all the exam students, e-exam students, are by the wall? Because that's where the sockets are, yeah? But you then have various columns of students in their desks, and we don't put the wires into every column, we put it into every other column. So where the wires are is a no-go zone for students or invigilators. But the invigilators can still get to every student by going to the transport aisles, the ones in between. So we make that quite clear to people. We've also, over the years, negotiated how much IT support we need in the exam room. Now, we're hoping to move, as was said earlier, to the point where the invigilators have some basic, very basic IT support skills. And that's a transition that we hope to see over time, but it's not there at the minute, so we have to employ IT officers to look after them. And we found that there are three main stages. So there's the bump in and bump out, so putting the wires down on the floor, making sure that they're not a trip hazard and things like that. And we've made an estimate there, 2 officers for half an hour for 100 students is our current staffing level. Then when we come to the exam, we have 1 computer service officer for half an hour for the first half an hour of the exam. During the boot up phase, which is spread out between entering the door and sitting down, that they sometimes need a bit of help there. And then during the e-exam, we've agreed that we won't have any support whatsoever. The students during their sort of preparation phase, when they get their own USB, they are given some instructions that say, now, turn off the power to your computer and see if you can cope with a reboot situation. So they should be able to cope with any cold starts if necessary. So that's the IT officers, and the last group of staff are the supervisors. So the core document for supervisors is the announcements to candidates. This is what they have to say at the beginning of the exam as they welcome people into the door and so on. We've also provided them with a 12-minute training video, which is supposed to be just enough to take them from not knowing about e-exams to knowing enough to do a good job. And the other thing that they're quite concerned about is what materials are provided. So we actually go over a picture here. Obviously, they have to have enough USBs for all the candidates. And the way that the university has decided to do it is they have a little plastic bag. The important thing is that in the acquittal process, they need to have something with a candidate's ID number on it. And the USB is too small to write on, so they put it in a plastic bag with a label on it. We also have a contingency plan just in case things go wrong, and it's either printed copies of the exam paper, which is kind of a bit difficult if you're doing a post-paper exam with things like programming and Scratch on it, but we have to have contingencies, all contingencies covered, or they can print it out from a PDF, which can be obtained from the server. And lastly, as I was saying earlier, the way we've given them as non-technical people to check that the USB has indeed been used to boot up is we've asked them to put this confidential security image onto each laptop. So if they stand at the back of the room and they can see all the screens, if they see the right picture on the screens on boot up, then they can be sure that those students are booted up from our USB. So if all of those things work, we should be able to see what's going on. So I've taken these videos over several years. So some of these are 6 years old, but they get more modern and they show you some of the things that have been happening. So we did in the first years give them choices. So this is a fairly large environment. See the e-exam people here near the wall, but people next to them handwriting. So you need to look at two individuals, the one closest to you and the one James. So see the handwriting. See James? Look at him going like a... And so this is where they got to use professional software during the exam. You see the Google Earth type program there in the corner, and you see there by the wall. And as you pan to the left, you're seeing more handwritings. So they coexist side by side quite happily.
Did anyone complain about the clacking?
I'll talk about that. I will. And so what I'm focusing on now is the power aisle, we're just coming up to now, and either side of the power aisle, there are the transport aisles. And you can tell it's a power aisle because we put a chair here, don't go here. That's the idea. So Ken asked about the clacking of the keys. So obviously when we do our own, surveys, we ask our e-exam candidates how do they feel about that. And, you know, we get some good honest answers from them. Our exams officers also asked the students in the same room who were not doing an e-exam, how did they feel about it? And generally speaking, they were okay. They weren't disturbed to any great degree by the presence of the e-exam candidates. So that's actually good to know. We have had some experience of operating in lab environments, and many of our labs have hard concrete walls. And if you're using a desktop computer with a standard desktop keyboard, it does clatter quite a lot. I remember one girl talking about her experience of being in that situation. She was there thinking, oh yeah, that's not a bad question. I can probably answer that question. Oh, but goodness me, I better catch up. Because, of course, she could hear the people either side of her typing. And if you take two people typing, it sounds like one person typing really fast. And when you multiply that by 20 people, you're thinking, oh my gosh, I need to type like this to keep up. So the desktop keyboards did give Ken, I mean, I don't know if this is where you're coming from with this question, but it did give the impression that she was going too slowly and she felt more anxiety because of it. Now we've moved into the big space. You saw the big gymnasium space. The laptop keyboards are actually much, much quieter. And even in that big space, the sound just drifts off into nowhere. You can hardly hear it. Of course, you've got to look at things from two sides. You know, if I take my exam paper and I go, oh, where's the question? You're making just as much noise as somebody on a keyboard. And if you've got an open book exam where they're throwing books all over the place, they make quite a lot of noise as well. So we say that we need to take that into account, to be fair, to the exam candidates. So, whoops, here we go. This device is the critical device to us. We use devices like this for our USB replication. Some people haven't seen these. You may be thinking that Thomas sits there 47,000 times. He puts a USB into his computer. He was telling me just now that, in fact, it takes 2 people 2 weeks to do the 47,000 USBs because they have monster duplicators. So probably this does about 20 at a time. You do 50, I think, at a time in one computer. Yeah. So you can get massive duplicators that will do these sorts of things for you. And that's really critical. I describe it as the digital equivalent of a photocopier. In terms of our results, what I've done is I've taken our unit, which has 2 assessments, a take-home assessment plus the e-exam, and plotted them on a graph. And I don't know how you feel about correlations, but I think that's quite good in that the students' results are not exactly on a straight line. They're scattered all over the place. Some of them have perhaps had some parent assist them with their first assessment task, and then they do bad in the exam, and vice versa. So the fact that we've got a distribution, if the e-exam was showing exactly the same result as the first assignment, we would be wondering why we had an exam at all. But I'm pretty pleased with that. And is the e-exam as good as being on paper? There is some academic work on this, and these two authors have done what they call attack defence trees, and they've tried to compare paper exams with e-exams based upon what was current when they wrote the paper. The conclusion is that neither has a clear advantage from a security perspective. Just as you can cheat in paper exams, you can cheat in e-exams to the same degree. So that's quite a nice piece of academic affirmation that the two are equivalent from the security point of view. Now, I'm going to ask Mathew to come up to talk about online, offline, on campus or distance.
Okay, so we've had a little bit of chatter around the pros and cons of on-campus, off-campus. This is my view. Obviously, Michael and Ken from CQU have got their own views, and that's fine. We're all allowed to disagree. But when I was sort of considering the main sort of pros and cons of do we have an online-only kind of network-dependent exam, or do we have an offline exam where we don't need to use a network, or do we do it on campus where we can watch the students closely, ensure they're not getting unauthorised assistance, vis-a-vis allow them to do it at home. We've all heard of the what we might call the take-home exam. Anybody use take-home exams in your institution or organisation? It's really just a time-limited assignment, isn't it? Because it's all got the integrity problems, if you will, of a unsupervised assessment. So from that point of view, I'm not a fan of the words take-home exam because I sort of associate an exam with something with a lot more integrity around it, and which is kind of why we bothered to go through that whole process. If you want to call it a time-limited assignment, then so be it. But I sort of looked at some of the pros and cons across these different things. You know, online network-based exam, do we do it at home or do we do it on campus? Increasingly, universities or educational institutions have a space problem. We have more students, we don't have more buildings. So at some point we reach a capacity. When I was at University of Queensland, we simply did not have enough physical places to put all the students in exams. And I'm sure it's only got worse since I've left. Not my fault, but you know. But universities tend to be reluctant to build huge new buildings, or they happen sometimes, but the student numbers are going up a lot faster than the building program is. And the number of exams, of course, are going up as well. We saw at Klagenfurt that you do them in lecture theatres, which is what we were forced to do at UQ as well. And of course, they were doing paper-based exams in that situation where they weren't doing randomisation of the questions and things. So I think an e-exam gives us some potential to use spaces that we couldn't previously use for exams, because we can, if we network things, randomise the questions around, you know, standard Moodle type of settings. So, you know, the holy grail essentially would be, from an administrator's point of view, as Andrew pointed out before, is to allow all the students to do it at home, and we watch them over a webcam. In my opinion, those systems have an advantage of potentially quite good identity verification with work from Tesla and projects like that. But where I feel they still fall down is the unauthorised assistance problem. In that, yes, we can identify who's in front of the keyboard, we can identify who's typing, we can do facial recognition, we can do all sorts of things. But we can't really stop the person in the next room rendering them help. Now, in an exam room environment, yes, it can still happen. You can have radio transmitter earbuds and things like that, and pens or eyeglasses, Google Glass style cameras with things like that in them. But the chance of being caught, I think, is much more if you have well-trained invigilators, and I emphasise the word well-trained. You know, the human presence in the space, I think, still makes a difference at this point in time. And I make the point around the $10 VGA splitter cable issue. Now, if you go onto the internet and you look for cheating online proctored exams, you'll find a website out there with step-by-step instructions of how to do it. Now, you simply need a $10 cable off eBay to undermine the whole system. Now, there may be some procedural things you can do. Sometimes the answer is not always technology. Some procedural things we can do to try and detect that being used. But if you have a computer, you might have to ban desktop computers, for example, right? Who's to say that that thing is not going to be plugged in after the exam starts by somebody hidden in a cupboard or under the desk or you know. But once that cable is in and it's starting to be transmitted, you get a vision transmitted to the next room. I mean, I suppose they could be wearing Google glasses and doing the same thing. Then the ability for somebody quite near to communicate back is then the problem for the student to sort out. But go and have a look at that website. Use the Google search terms for cheat online exams. They've provided a whole lot of helpful suggestions for students wishing to get around the online proctoring systems. Just as there are websites help students to get around supervised exam spaces. But maybe I'm just a cautious person. I couldn't recommend them personally to my institution yet. I'm hopeful for the future, but until we solve that unauthorised assistance problem, I think we're still stuck with the good old-fashioned come to the venue and do it in the exam room situation. So that's sort of what I wanted to say. There are, you know, the future is unknown. We have many possibilities coming. Do we have any questions at this stage? The next session will be a hands-on, but we still have a little bit of time, I think. Come up and oops.
Yeah, hi. I noticed on the list of technology you can use for the e-exams that some of them you couldn't actually use, like the Lenovo 100 series laptops. Was that because of a booting issue, or?
Yeah, I can answer
what?
that one. Yep. Well, that was actually is no longer true, strictly speaking, but we couldn't be bothered updating the instructions at this point. It's a conservative list of what works and what doesn't. There's also Apple USB-C equipped machines that says on that list can't work. Some of those can now work. Again, this is what I was talking about the never-ending arms race between the manufacturers and the software producers. Nothing will ever stand still, and therefore we have to keep up with progress. So, yes.
Hi, my name's Ray. I work with Griffith in the online unit. So we've been using Proctor-U for a couple of years. And I guess I just wanted to comment on our experience with academic integrity. We've probably had one student reported in that time. So, and she opened Google and started searching, and she was instructed not to, and then continued to do that. Other than that, students are asked to kind of get their webcam and show the room, so and then they're recorded. So a screen recording is made of their entire exam. So I guess I'd encourage people to look into it, is my comment.
Sure.
Andrew, just a logistical question, particularly with your 2012 video there. So students had the choice to opt in or opt out at that point, did they?
Look, I do advise this for any of our academics that are thinking of taking it on, that they start off by giving students choice. And I think I was listening to some of our students that are here today, and they were thinking it should be a choice. But there comes a point where you need to say, the questions themselves, the subject matter, needs to go on computers. So about 4 years ago, I actually transitioned from paper replacement to post paper, so that for the last 4 years my exams have been wholly on computer. And it's been quite interesting. I know that Gabby talked about having the 10% of loaners. Our IT services were of the opinion that this would not fly unless we could actually be sure that every student could get their own computer. And that's what we've done for the last couple of years. We've actually insisted that students bring their own computer. As one of the comments was shown in the text analysis, they've had to borrow a computer from a friend. But I said, look, it's only for a couple of hours. It shouldn't be too hard. And they have managed to come to the party with that. So we've actually been running with no loan equipment whatsoever. So, yeah.
But, well, back then, how did you organise? Did the students have to notify you prior as far as whether they wanted to opt in or out?
So we had to notify our exams office how many of them were using a computer in each of the locations that I showed you.
Could do the seating arrangements
Exactly.
based on that.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah.
Other questions or comments?
I was wondering if you have, or anyone else here has experience with student interaction with a remote live proctor while they are sitting an exam in a remote mode. So the reason I ask is specifically for ProctorU. I've seen a website called Yelp in US, and a lot of people have sort of, left very negative sort of feedback about ProctorU, but in particular. And most of their feedback was having to do with this interaction between a live proctor from anywhere in the world to, with that student. So is there some sort of, experience here as well?
Obviously not from me, but there must be perhaps people in the audience that have had that.
I guess, and I was sharing at the table here earlier, when, as a staff member, I did a practice exam with that, and I was quite surprised by my own sort of emotional reaction to having this. It kind of felt quite intrusive at the time, but our students haven't reported an issue with that. The most common issue has been internet connection. So for one student in a remote town, we had to find a exam centre through Open Universities Australia. But otherwise, all other students were able to access good internet. And ProctorU actually has a really good kind of online equipment test. So it gives students good feedback. But yeah, and they really do, you need to show your whole room, including the ceiling, the floor, under the desk and so on, to make sure no one's hiding. So
Interesting, yeah. I think we need to move on to the...
Sorry, just one last comment here.
Oh.
Okay? Not a
Yeah.
question.
No, just to say we've used RP Now, which is not quite the same as ProctorU. So you've got the likes of ProctorU, which I think is instant, that's being watched while the exam's on. RP Now is recorded and sent through and then looked at after the exam, post the exam, and marked. It comes back with basically a traffic light, no problems, maybe some violations, or a red, there are violations and you need to look at this. That did create some anxiety for students, but 98% of the students were okay with it. And then, of course, the new systems that are coming out now are basically based on algorithms, so you're not needing to rely so much on you being watched. It's more about what's happening on your machine and measuring. So there are different proctoring systems.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Andrew, do you want to introduce the next section?
I'm just going to, yes. Just two things. I mean, AI is watching you, is what we get from there. And I did want to add one more thing to my talk. In terms of the power, we're finding 50% of our students do not use mains power, which is quite good because we'd like to get rid of all those cables. But now I'm going to pass over to Mathew.